We're going to first begin with a tuna loin piece with the head removed and also the tail section removed. As you can see from this picture, this is a little bit of too much material taken off the head portion. From the processed tuna loin, you'll notice a white band that runs across. This is called suji, and it's a very tough fibrous part of the fish that we're going to need to remove. We're going to begin removing the suji by running the blade along the sides of it. Carefully run your blade all the way down the length of the fish and run it along the hard fibrous part against the suji. Keep running your blade along the side inside the cavity of where the suji is, and just keep working at it until you remove this piece as shown in this video. Before cutting the loin into saku blocks, you're going to want to place the suji part down and the dark meat portion outwards so it follows the striations correctly. We're going to next start out by measuring with a ruler or a guide 15 centimeter blocks in length. We're going to start from the head portion and work our way back to the tail. Using a sharp blade, make sure to mark your areas before you start cutting each block. For the last tail portion, the muscle is very tough and fibrous, so we're going to use these for a different purpose, not for the saku block. We're going to begin cutting the saku blocks, but before we can start that, we're going to want to measure out our height. For the recommended size that we're going to be selling this at, we want this at about 2.5 centimeters to about 3 centimeters, somewhere in between, so as the saku blocks are not too thin or not too thick. A section of the tuna loin that you've just cut can create several saku blocks, so make sure you measure out correctly and follow the guidelines in terms of thickness. You'll notice that as I'm cutting this, we can create about 3 saku blocks from this particular loin. After measuring out your portions, you're going to go ahead and lay the block back down, and you're going to cut your saku with one swift motion from one side to the other. Make sure to use a sharp blade to make this job a whole lot easier. You're going to continue all of this until you get to portions that are a little uneven and not fitting of our guidelines. These pieces will also be used for other types of tuna products, so make sure you put them aside in a nice place where you can get back to them. After the initial cuts, you'll have some pieces that are irregular, but this is okay. Any type of CO treatment that's going to be done with this tuna will be done in this phase before there's any other final trimming cuts done to it. After you're done cutting your loin, you'll have several different shaped pieces. You'll have your square saku blocks, you'll have some uneven pieces which will be used for tuna pieces, and then you'll also have the tail section. The tail end of the tuna loin is great for tuna pieces. We like to go ahead and measure these kind of like the saku block cutting procedure, but we like to measure these in 2 centimeter thicknesses instead. Once you have the tail section all measured out, you're going to go ahead and begin cutting it just like you cut the saku blocks. You're going to cut it with one swift motion from the head end to the tail end, and you'll notice that it'll come out with nice size blocks, but they will be irregular in shape. These irregularly shaped blocks are not going to be used for saku blocks, but they will however be used for other applications such as tuna pieces and tuna ground. Some parts of the tail ends of the loin you'll notice has a lot of striations. These will have to be ground as they're too tough to chew, and it's not going to be a pleasurable experience for the customer. After cutting, you'll have several pieces of different shapes and sizes. This piece is far too small and will not be used for a saku block. To determine the quality of the tuna piece and to say if it's AAA or AA, you're going to need to evaluate the amount of suji that your pieces has. If the piece has a lot of suji or has some suji in it, it will be considered AA. However, if it's clean, just like this piece right here in this picture, this will be considered a AAA quality saku block. After these saku blocks have been treated or have come back, you're going to want to do some final trimmings before the product is ready to sell to the customer. Any of these unsightly overhangs and gaps that you see on the sides, you're going to want to trim off very slightly. If there's enough portion removed, make sure to save the pieces to be used for tuna ground. For the final cutting, the saku blocks do not have to have its sides perfectly even. It's actually preferred to be in this shape as you see in this picture. Next, in the final trimming for the saku blocks, we're going to need to determine the size and the naming that we designate for it. For our A1A portions, you'll notice it's about a palm's width, and they go from about 8 to 10 centimeters in width. The other piece that you see pictured here, it runs about 6 to 8 centimeters. So we're going to want to trim out the portion that's uneven, and we can still use this 6 to 8 centimeter piece as an A2A saku block. Any of the trimmings that you see here, make sure to keep them. If they're fairly large enough, we can use them for both tuna pieces, or if they're small, then we can use it for tuna ground. So for production's sake, we want to keep a minimum height of about 2.5 centimeters, more close to 3 centimeters. The length is always going to be 15 centimeters, and we're also going to want the varying width classified for our sizes. For the tuna pieces, you're going to be using the leftover parts, the trimmings that we took off the saku blocks. Now, this doesn't have to be a perfect cube, so make sure not to spend too much time with this project. There are lots of parts of the tuna loin that can be used for these tuna pieces. Make sure you extract it like the tail section, which does have a lot of suji, but can be cut out and then cubed to be used for this purpose. Make sure to designate if it's going to be a AA tuna pieces or AAA tuna pieces by checking the suji amount. Just like our saku, any pieces that do not have the suji will be considered AAA pieces. Now remember that suji piece that we cut out? This can also be used to make tuna ground, and here's how we're going to do it. Using a spoon, make sure to take that suji piece, and you see the striation, just run that spoon along the sides of it. You'll notice that the meat comes off, but the suji remains. It's because the suji is very tough and fibrous, it actually is strong enough to stay there. We're going to continue to do this until all the meat is removed and you're left with just the suji, which you can discard. Once you're done with everything, you should have some beautiful tuna pieces, tuna ground, as well as your saku blocks in different sizes and different grades. Thank you.